I was living with my stepsister in a small apartment, and we both worked night shifts. I usually got home a few hours before she did. I had just gotten home when there was a knock at the door. I didn't recognize the guy through the peephole, but assumed it was one of her friends and opened the door to tell him she was still at work. He surprised me when he said he was there to see me. He said he lived a few doors down and that he had seen me carrying a guitar case to and from my car and wanted to know if I played. I said I did. It was apparent at this point that the man was very drunk. He asked if I'd be willing to play something for him. I knew it was a bad idea, but didn't know how to say no, so I said sure. He came inside and locked the door behind him. Not the greatest sign, but this was already not going well. He tried to follow me into my bedroom as I fetched the guitar, but I managed to tell him to sit on the couch in the living room so he'd be more comfortable. I played a song or two, and he started crying and said I have the voice of an angel. He wanted to play a song for me, if that was okay. I said sure, but he was fumbling around with it and didn't seem to know how to play. He assured me that the problem was my guitar. He was used to an electric, you see. He used to be the lead guitarist for Metallica actually, but left shortly before they became famous. In fact, most of their songs were originally his. I didn't believe a word of it, but nodded and acted sympathetic. He wanted to prove to me that he was a really good guitar player and asked me to come over to his place so he could play his electric guitar. Again, I knew this was an awful idea. It was bad enough letting some drunk stranger into my house, but leaving with him would be even worse. Still, he insisted, and I didn't know how to refuse. His place was a mess. He couldn't find his guitar. Then he said he forgot that he sold it a long time ago. He offered to put on the newest Star Wars movie, and we can drink some beer instead. I think it was the second prequel, but I can't really remember. I said that's fine, so we put on the movie and said some stuff about how his family was involved in filming it and various other claims that were ridiculous. About 20 minutes into the movie, he told me he had something to confess. He said that a dark force came to him every night and that it was Satan, and Satan kept telling him to kill me. He started crying again and said he didn't want to kill me because I was so nice and I was probably an angel. He also said that Satan would soon take over his body, so I needed to leave immediately if I wanted to live. I was more than fine with that, so I got up to go. Before I could get to the door, he asked me to wait because he wanted to give me a gift. He said it was an ancient coin that had been in his family for generations, and it was probably worth $1 million by now. He put it in my hand, closed my fingers around it, and said some weird gibberish while crying. Then he screamed at me to run. I looked at it after I got the hell out of there, and it was just an ordinary silver dollar from 1972. I still have it actually. I feel like I should have called the police or done something about what happened, but I didn't. I just hope he never hurt anybody and he got the help he desperately needed. First things first, this is not my story but my father's. I might be breaking the rules with that, but I thought I'd give it a go on here. This happened in the summer of 1993. My dad and his girlfriend, who's now my stepmother, were living in Cardiff, Wales in the city centre. Not a particular high crime area, a lot of student accommodation. I won't give the exact location, but there was a cafe nearby named the Warmest Toast Cafe, amusingly abbreviated on the front as Twat Cafe. It's pretty irrelevant to the story, but I had to mention it. So, 6 a.m. my dad gets up and walks down to the kitchen to get his morning coffee. As he walks into the kitchen, he is welcomed by a random man sitting at the kitchen table staring at him. Being the cool, collected guy he is, instead of freaking out, my dad asks the guy if he wants a cup of coffee. The breakfast intruder agrees and joins him. A few minutes later, my dad's girlfriend comes in, also doesn't freak out and offers to make him some breakfast. So the three of them sit down, have breakfast, and have a chat for 20 minutes or so. Apparently the conversation was a bit weird and nonsensical, but they didn't say what it was about. Breakfast finishes, and they escort him through the front door. After he leaves, they start freaking out and naturally call the police. Police come, take statements, etc. Later in the day, they're contacted by the police, saying that they apprehended the guy. Turns out the guy was a paranoid schizophrenic and was breaking into the odd number houses on my street. My dad's was the second house he entered. The first house, which was next door, he'd gone into, but it was empty. This is where he left his tools, a sawed-off shotgun and a lot of ammo. His plan was to shoot anyone in the odd number houses on the street. When the police arrested him, he told them that my dad and his girlfriend were the nicest couple he'd ever met, and that had stopped him from carrying out his plan. So when people say I'm too laid back for my own good, I tell them this story, and it never fails to shut them up. When I was in 4th grade, my family was still living in Denver, Colorado, in a small condo near my school. My brother, who was in kindergarten at that time, and I only had to cross the street and walk between a couple of apartment buildings to get to the football field attached to our school. It was normally a pretty quick and safe trip to and from. My mother was taking night classes at the NAU at the time, and her boyfriend, who lived with us, would usually watch us in the evenings, although he wasn't off work until about 6:30 p.m. We grew up as latchkey kids, so it wasn't a big deal. One day, my brother and I were walking home together after school like we usually do, and had just gotten to the street in front of our home, when suddenly a white car pulled up in front of us. The man driving in the car didn't seem like your typical weirdo, maybe in his late 20s, and looking pretty clean-cut. Looking back, the fact that he was driving such a fancy car, I believe it was a Benz, and wearing such a crisp outfit didn't really fit in with our neighborhood. He asked my brother and I if our parents were home. I immediately got a serious sensation of stranger danger from this dude. I looked at our apartment across the street, then back at him, and in the most I'm not stupid tone I could find, I asked why. "It doesn't matter," he replied. "Are they home?" He seemed to get a little more insistent with his question and glanced around. "Yep," I said, despite fully knowing they were not home and that my mom's boyfriend wouldn't be home for another 2 hours. I figured it was better to lie and say yes. "What are they doing?" he asked, really looking us over. I turned to my brother and ordered him, "Let's go," but he wouldn't follow me. I went to grab his hand, and he quickly withdrew it with a sharp no and looked back at the guy. Then the guy looked at both of us, and then back at my brother, and with a facial expression that made my hair stand on end, he said, "Come closer. I have something for you." My brother started walking to the door of the car, and the guy was reaching with his hand out. There was nothing in it, and it was like he was about to grab him. I grabbed my brother's coat and immediately started to haul him towards our apartment as fast as I could. He was screaming for me to let him go, but I was so terrified I just kept dragging him. The guy quickly put his car into gear and literally peeled out of there. My mother's friends started picking us up from school after that, and a PSA was issued to the community. I still get a little creeped out when cars slow down near me. So, potential child abductor, let's not meet again. Last summer, my boyfriend and I went camping in some nature preserve in Pennsylvania. I really can't remember the name, but there was no cell service, and we saw 2 other people there in the entire place. It was huge, so it was pretty empty. My boyfriend pretty much immediately said these 2 people seemed off to him right away. I don't know if they had anything to do with what happened that night, but I'll describe them. The first person was a woman who had her truck parked off the trail and the hood open. I don't really notice these types of things. but my boyfriend said it looked to him like she was waiting for someone to pull off beside her and offer to help with her truck. Normally my boyfriend is the type to at least offer to call someone, but he said she skeeved him out enough. He didn't even want to draw her attention more than what's necessary. The next person we saw drove by several times while we were setting up. He just kept driving by slowly and looking at us. I didn't even notice him until my boyfriend pointed out that he had already done that twice. Whether these two people had anything sinister going on or not, the real story has to do with what woke us up around 3 a.m. It was incredibly loud and sudden. I couldn't describe it or even compare it to anything, but my boyfriend said it sounded to him similar to a chain gun revving up, or someone using some large tool to scrape gravel. My boyfriend jumped up and looked out the little window of the tent. The sound happened again and again, and it was getting noticeably closer each time. I was about to piss myself, but my boyfriend told me it was probably miles off. I really didn't question this, because loud noises can be heard from miles off, right? Later my boyfriend told me that because he didn't want to scare me. It really sounded like it was coming right down the little dirt road. At one point he said he suspected it was right in front of our campsite. The only reason he didn't tell me to get out and dart for the car was because he was afraid it could be someone trying to scare us out of the tent for some dreadful reason. He whispered. I should have noticed he was whispering and knew something was wrong, since otherwise he'd just speak up normally, right? For me just to go back to sleep. However, I could not, because every little sound I heard outside sounded like someone was sneaking up to the tent. Eventually my boyfriend told me to get out and help him pack up. It was maybe 20 minutes after the sound stopped. He held our only weapon, a machete, in front of him. It was a full moon, or close to it, so we didn't need a light. While we were packing quickly, I noticed an empty beer can close to our dead campfire. It wasn't there when we went to sleep around 10 p.m., and neither of us even brought any beer. Thankfully, we got out of there, and for the rest of that trip, we either camped in areas well populated by other campers, or we got a hotel room. So whoever or whatever that was, let's never meet again. When I was 21, I transferred to a college in San Francisco. I checked out a room for rent on Craigslist. It was in a really nice 2-bedroom apartment. It was cheap rent and close to campus, so it was the ideal spot. The girl who lived there was 29, and her name was Beth. She was tall and wide, and she had jet black hair and wore pale makeup. She seemed nice, although a little quiet, but she seemed to like me and agreed to let me move in. So far, so good. My first night there, we went out for pizza, and that's when I could tell something was a little bit off with her. Throughout dinner, she kept telling me how much I looked like Shia LaBeouf. I didn't know what to say, so I just shrugged it off with a thanks. I mean, I looked nothing like Shia LaBeouf, so it just didn't make any sense to me. When we got back home, she asked if I had seen her room yet. I said no, and so she took me to see it. Her walls were covered in posters of Shia LaBeouf. She even had printed out photos of him all over her mirror. She owned all of his movies. I really didn't know what to make of it. It was so creepy. The whole night she had been saying I looked like him, and now it's obvious to me that she's obsessed with the guy. A few weeks passed, and I never really saw her that much. We didn't spend any time together, really. She would come home from work and practically run to her room. She would spend the whole night in there. She had this creepy, high-pitched giggle, and I would hear her giggling through the walls at night. I wondered what the hell she could possibly be doing. Occasionally, she would come out and talk for like 2 minutes, and she would always be slurring her words, so I suspected she was drinking a lot. Sometimes she wouldn't say anything, and she would just stand in the hallway and watch me in the living room. I would turn and see her and be surprised and say, "Hello, Beth," And then there would be this long, awkward pause, and she would give out her creepy, high-pitched giggle. It was uncomfortable being around her. She gave me the chills. One night I woke up around 2 a.m. because I heard what sounded like the front door being unlocked. I came out of my bedroom and all the lights were off, but I could still see Beth standing at the front door. She had her face against it, and she was turning the lock back and forth over and over again, and every time she turned the bolt, she mumbled my name. Max Barker, Max Barker, Max Barker. Seeing her stand in the dark and mumbling my name really freaked me out. And it doesn't help that she kinda looks like a bigger version of the girl from The Ring. I just quietly went back to my room and tried to sleep. One night I was watching Gladiator, and she stumbled out of her room and turned on the living room light, forcing me to pause the movie, which was really annoying. Then she asked me if I wanted to hear about her ex-boyfriend. It was a really uneasy way into a topic, but I just said sure and then awkwardly sat back to listen to her. 10 minutes into her story, and she was so riled up. She was screaming at the top of her lungs about their breakup. I was worried that the neighbors were going to call the cops, and she wasn't listening to me when I asked her to lower the volume. Amidst all of her screaming, one thing she said really freaked me out. She was in such a fit and yelled, "I'll slit his fucking throat." That was a big game changer. Suddenly I had no idea what this girl was capable of. She was practically a stranger, and everything I had seen was becoming alarmingly disturbing. After a few more minutes, she told me thanks for listening and started doing her giggle. I got out of there pretty fast and went to my room to go to sleep. I had a pretty unsettled feeling about being in the house with her, and what's worse is that there was no lock on my bedroom door. I pushed the edge of the dresser in front of it to act as a little barricade. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of my dresser scraping against the floor. Beth was pushing the door open. I turned on my light, shouting at her to stop. I could see her through the opening of the door. She was so drunk and had this insane look in her eyes. I pushed the door closed and yelled at her to go to bed. I could hear her walk back to her room, but I couldn't fall back asleep. The next morning when I went out into the hallway, my heart dropped. I saw one of her steak knives was on the floor by my door. I got goosebumps all over my arms. All I could think about was her saying she would slit that guy's throat. I confronted her about it, and she said she didn't remember trying to push my door open. She said she didn't even remember telling me about her ex. I had enough. My lease was month to month, so I found a new spot and moved out. About a month after, I moved out and she contacted me. I was at the movies and my phone was off. When I got out, I turned my phone on, and to my shock, I received 40 plus text messages that had been sent over and over the past 2 hours. They were all just insane texts that ranged from everything between "Hi, how are you?" to "I fucking hate you." It was insane. I didn't respond, and I have never heard from her again. I always wonder, if I hadn't set my dresser in front of my door, would she have quietly come into my room and slit my throat? It freaks me out.